Welcome to The Authority File, the podcast that features conversations about the life cycle of scholarly communication. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice, a publishing division of the Association of College and Research Libraries. This four-part series is brought to you with support from Gale, publisher of 18th Century Collections Online, Part 3. For more than 2 decades, 18th Century Collections Online has been a foundation of global scholarship on the long 18th century, giving researchers access to millions of pages of books, pamphlets, and rare print that shaped the modern world. Now, with Echo Part 3, those collections are expanding again with 1.7 million pages of new primary sources, including rare and unique miniature books newly digitized for the very first time. This new collection provides researchers with new perspectives on print culture, literacy, craftsmanship, and everyday life in the 1700s. To learn more and request trial access for your library, visit gale.com/echo-3. Again, that's gale.com/ECCO-III. In this series, we're taking a fascinating behind-the-scenes look at how primary sources are brought to life in a digital research environment. More specifically, we'll travel back in time to the 18th century when a unique publication format was all the rage: tiny books. Joining me for this series is Eleanor Leese, Acquisitions Editor for Gale Primary Sources, who explains for us what tiny books are and the careful process of digitizing them for the Echo Part 3 platform. We'll talk about identification, handling, and imaging techniques, as well as how Gale collaborated with libraries to bring these delicate materials into a contemporary research platform. In this third episode of our series, we talk more about digitizing these tiny books, how library partners have participated in the process, and how digital access has advanced primary source research. Let's dig into the process of imaging these.
Mm.
Can you start by talking about, the physical nature of these texts? What are some of the condition issues unique to them, like paper quality or binding?
Yeah, so the thing with miniature books is that they have the same issues as all other books. So you
Hmm.
need to consider the paper quality, whether there are, mold issues, the condition of the binding, how far it's safe to open them. But you're doing all that whilst not really being able to hold on to them properly. If you think about if you open a page that's an inch square and you're trying not to put your finger on any of the ink because you know that that's not great conservation wise, it just becomes really tricky. And the sorts of tools that we would normally use to help us, so book cradles and cushions and weights, that you might use to hold a book open so that you can read it, don't fit, or certainly don't fit without obscuring the text. So none of the tools that we have that would work with normal size books help us with miniature books. So
Right.
the team at the British Library actually had to build a custom book cradle for imaging all of the miniature books. So this is because we don't want to open the books out flat and crack or break the spines. We want to
Hmm.
hold them open at, sometimes a 90-degree angle, just open far enough that we can get the camera to take a good picture.
Right.
Um, so in the studio, we have cradles that we can use for the normal size books that they sit in, and then a piece of perspex goes over the top as long as it's safe to do so, and we can take a picture of
Mhm.
each side of the book. The miniature books don't fit into that, so we had to, the amazing team at the British Library built a miniature book cradle to hold our miniature books, which they tested by making their own miniature book so that we didn't have
Oh,
to test
wow.
it out on the valuable,
Yeah.
fragile 18th century ones. So they created a little miniature book with I think it had a picture of Henry VIII stuck in so that they could test. whether they were going to get good images from it, with a little clear plastic strap to hold it open.
Mm.
So the amount of work that goes into that stage of it is incredible before the book even makes it to the studio, for the imaging team to work with. And then the conservators with particularly fragile items will go to the studio with the items so that they can support the imaging team.
Hmm.
The other thing that we found with the miniature ones was, although they want the books to be tiny, sometimes if stuff doesn't fit, they will just create a fold out. So you've got a tiny, tiny book, maybe 2 inches high, with a fold out page that might be 10 inches long.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So then you're trying to support the tiny book on the miniature book cradle that you've created, and then you have to try and support the fold out at the
Hmm.
same time. So yeah, it introduced quite a few issues for the imaging team and for the conservation team.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, it's almost groundbreaking in a way because the equipment didn't exist, to image these things. It had to be created for it.
They built it from scratch.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. Um, I'm wondering, if your library partners come back into play during this process and assist in any way in determining what should or shouldn't be digitized. Is that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So some of those questions are answered sort of at the scoping stage of a project, of looking
Mhm.
what's in their catalogue, what we might want to include, what we don't want to include. But there are always surprises. So, and the Echo seems to throw out more surprises than most. So some of the decisions we've had to make are, so one title was a catalogue, a plant catalogue, which we seem to see quite a lot of, sort of botanical garden catalogues. And one of them had plant samples dried and pressed into the leaves of the volume.
Wow.
So that was a real question. That's a completely different type of conservation than the
Hmm.
one that we were expecting to do on a printed catalogue. But I went back to the ESTC, so the English Short Title Catalogue, um, and had a look at the description of the volume that's in the ESTC. And it did note in the ESTC that there were botanical samples included. So I thought it's part of the materiality of that volume. And so we decided to include them. But the level of difficulty that the Conservatives faced with that one, and the lengths that they go to make sure that it could be included, was incredible. So in one of them, there was a mulberry leaf that was pressed between the leaves of the volume, and it was crumbling, and so parts of the leaf were falling out. So to find out how best to reattach it, one of the Conservators went to Kew Garden and, I assume with the permission of Kew Garden, picked samples of different varieties of mulberry leaf, brought them back to the studio, the conservation lab, dried them all, and then tested different types of glue on the different types of leaves, of different varieties of mulberry leaves, to find out which would be the most suitable for reattaching
Oh
the
my
dried
gosh.
crumbling mulberry leaf so that it could be digitized.
Hmm.
Um, so we've seen botanical samples, fabric samples in some of them, and it's a judgment call each time for how are the items that are being found between the leaves, are they incidental? So sometimes you'll find a pressed flower, or the image quality assurance team will come back and say that there's a bug squashed between these pages. And I was like, well, the bug looks like it's been there for 200 years. So I think we'll probably we'll
Right.
probably have to leave that one. But if
And
a
did
flower,
it get in there by accident or was it put in
yeah,
there?
yeah, it's probably just last time someone read the book
Right.
got squished in there. So we can't really
Yeah.
go and remove the bug just
Hmm.
because it's blocking some of the text. Um, if a flower's been pressed between the pages for sentimental reasons, and it would sort of add significantly to the conservation, but it's not sort of material to the nature of the text, we might choose not to conserve and digitize that. But where the sort of additional items seem really significant to how the text is to be understood,
Hmm.
then we have included them. So that there's no sort of scientific rule that applies to all of the volumes. It's sort of making a judgment call as the archive throws up surprises, as it is wont to do.
Right. Oh my gosh, that's fascinating. So we kind of touched on this next question, I think, a little bit in a previous episode, but based on sort of the variety of tiny book formats and their presumed use and value from the time they were created. Um, you've talked about how the digitization process can remediate books into objects instead of
Mm,
texts. And I'm curious, like, in that at that juncture, what are the consequences of that? How does that affect primary source research and scholarship? Um, because it was sounding like tiny books aren't just texts. They could be objects in
right.
of themselves. So
I think the materiality of these tiny miniature books is quite obvious because we can imagine how people carried them, that they might be part of their outfit, that they might be thinking
yeah.
about how they look and the image that they present to the world. Um, but that doesn't just apply to the miniature books. And I think when we started seeing these very large online archives, digital archives that made digital humanities projects, which had been sort of going since the 50s, people trying to count the number of words, in the Bible and coming up with word frequencies. When products like Echo launched, those digital humanities projects became so accessible to so many more people. There was this explosion of interest in distant reading the canon, looking at the publishing across the century as a whole, as opposed to looking at individual texts, which was really the method that was available to most scholars before then. But I think in doing that, something gets lost along the way
Hmm.
because the medium is the message and the message is the medium. And if you take a text out of the book that it was published in, um, it loses something. You gain an enormous amount by being able to analyze and manipulate that text, but you do lose some of the meaning. So I think it's something that the humanities world has been grappling with over the past decade, is how do we reintroduce that materiality and regain those meanings
Hmm.
um, for these texts, whilst keeping the democratization of access that digital archives allow. So, one of the ways that we've done that in Echo 3 is by imaging the book covers and the spines and the blank pages, and the scribblings on the inside covers and the mulberry leaves at the
Right.
back of printed catalogues, to try and bridge that gap. Um, but remediation happens in lots of different ways. And I think the digital archive is only one of them. So when newspapers are bound in hard copy in libraries, and newspapers would often produce a library edition without
Hmm.
supplements and things so that they could be easily bound and shelved, that's a form of remediation. When we see something we have a lot of in Echo is broadside ballads that would have been sold on street corners and sung in alehouses and pasted on walls as sort of forms of decoration. When they're bound into books in libraries, that's a form of remediation. So
Hmm.
I think scholars are used to and skilled at seeing the different ways in which a text has been remediated and the different meanings it can sort of take on during those different processes. And what we've tried to do by including more of the object is trying to show those relationships between the object and the text. And so partly that's the extra scanning that we've done in using color. Partly it's changes that we've made to the platform that you view Echo in. So things like being able to have a 2-page view, so you have facing pages, so you can restore some of the relationships between illustrations, say, and text that are
Mhm.
lost if you are scrolling one page at a time. But it raises really interesting questions about what we gain and what we lose by using a digital archive as opposed to the original hard copies in whatever form they might survive.
Right.
Um, but I always fall on the side that many of these titles would not be accessible in any other way. So whatever meaning you might lose from the remediation, um, being able to see them
Mhm.
kind of trumps that.
Yeah.
At the moment, we're finishing up our scanning at the British Library. We're going through the last couple of weeks, and I have my list of items for inclusion in Echo 3 that are unique to the British Library. So they hold the only copy in the world, and I'm making sure as many of those as possible going to Echo. So yeah, there are pros and cons to every remediation, but I think being able to access it from around the world is the trump card, really.
Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty powerful. You just heard from Eleanor Lease, Acquisitions Editor for Gale Primary Sources. Join us next week as we expand our discussion into metadata, cataloging, and other quality control considerations for digital primary sources. This 4-part series is brought to you with support from Gale, publisher of 18th Century Collections Online, Part 3. For more than 2 decades, 18th Century Collections Online has been a foundation of global scholarship on the long 18th century, giving researchers access to millions of pages of books, pamphlets, and rare print that shaped the modern world. Now, with Echo Part 3, those collections are expanding again with 1.7 million pages of new primary sources, including rare and unique miniature books newly digitized for the very first time. This new collection provides researchers with new perspectives on print culture, literacy, craftsmanship, and everyday life in the 1700s. To learn more and request trial access for your library, visit gale.com/echo-3. Again, that's gale.com/ECCO-III. The Authority File podcast is brought to you every week by Choice and produced and edited by digital media producer Sabrina Kofer. Underwriting opportunities are directed by Melissa Carr and Ryan King. For more information about sponsorship opportunities, download the Choice Media Kit at choice360.org. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.